If you're going to drive your Cadillac down the highway of life, you are going to take some dings. You have to expect some dings, and there will be in a lifetime of a contact martial art like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where the whole point of the art is to put someone very close to being injured. You're going to take some injuries. So what we want to do is we want to minimize that. Let's just agree that injury of any type is the enemy. Welcome to the Ageless Warrior Lab. I'm BJJ Black Belt and Dirty Dozen member Dave Meyer, here to draw wisdom from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the martial arts and explore how it applies to success in business, relationships, your long-term health, and making the most out of your life. So last Saturday, I was asked to head up to Seattle where my coach Higa Machado was teaching some seminars, and we had a bit of a ceremony, and he presented me with a coral belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is a 7th degree black belt. You can look it up. And I was pretty ambivalent about getting this honor, to be honest. When I got my black belt, I felt like it meant that I was really, really good and can beat everybody else on the mat. And of course, now, so many years later, I can't beat the best black belts. And then there are some brown belts and even purple belts I can't beat or have a hard time beating. So it just felt like a reminder of my age. But after some coaxing and a lot of congratulations from a lot of people, I have come to realize that what it really means is not just that I didn't die, but that I didn't quit. This was something that my coach Hagen was saying. And I guess there is something to be said about that, right? Not very many people actually start training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Even fewer people make it up through the belts. Very much fewer will ever make it to black belt, and very fewer of them will ever make it 30 years as a black belt, continue to train. And so I appreciate that. But what it has given risen to is a lot of people asking me, how have I stayed in the sport for this long? And I thought this would be a good subject of an episode about how to avoid injury. You know, there's a lot of reasons that someone might stop training in jiu-jitsu. They may have just gotten what they wanted out of it. They move on to other things. They get busy. They lose interest, all of which are perfectly fine. Everything has its place in time. But one reason that someone who wants to keep training in jiu-jitsu has to stop training is injury. And so that's the thing that we want to avoid. So I thought, let's spend a little time looking at how to avoid injury. Now, I will say that if you're going to drive your Cadillac down the highway of life, you are going to take some dings, okay? I always tell people that. So you have to expect some dings, and there will be in a lifetime of martial arts, and certainly of a contact martial art like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where the whole point of the art is to put someone very close to being injured and then stopping. You're gonna take some injuries. So what we want to do is we want to minimize that. I also joke around and say, any cartilage you die with is just fun you didn't have. And what I mean by that is literally, we wear ourselves down over time, and we want to get the full use out of what I call the machine, this body, but we don't want to use it up too quickly, right? We don't want to have used up all our cartilage by the time we're 60, or now rounding the dentist 64 like me, and then have another 30, 40 years, hopefully in pain or anything like that. So let's just agree that injury is the enemy. Now, one thing that it's important to understand is the distinction between pain and injury. Pain is a signal that if you keep doing something, you might get injured, but in and of itself, it's not necessarily a problem. We say in the martial arts, pain is mandatory, but suffering, that's optional. You are going to have to endure some pain, but the point is you don't want to be injured, right? You want to be able to train again tomorrow. You want to be able to live to fight another day. So when I think about injury, there's really 3 kinds of injury, all of which are to be avoided, but each one is worse than the one before it. The first kind of injury is a tweak, is something that hurts, something now you're going to have to tape up, but it's not going to prevent you from training. It's something you can work around. Again, you would like to avoid that, although, as I've said in a previous episode, sometimes that can be a blessing in disguise. If something happens where your wrist is hurting and now you decide you can't use that wrist, it will force you to adapt, and it might force you to get good at something else. So I would say for that kind of benefit, you should do that intentionally. Just sometimes train without using your arm, or train without doing a particular technique you're good at. Handicap yourself. But the handicap doesn't have to be forced on you by an injury. Obviously, that's not ideal. Now, the second kind of an injury is the one that's going to take you off the mat, right? You have pulled a muscle or you've injured a joint or something like that. And it could take you off the mat for a week or two, or it could take you off the mat for a long time if it leads to surgery. Obviously, this is to be avoided. Now, the third kind of injury is the one that takes you off the mat permanently. And it may be that you injured your neck, it may be you injured your back or something like that, where it's just never going to be safe to come back and train again. And obviously, that's the worst of all injuries. But I want to point out that that might be an individual event. So you injured something and now you just can no longer ever come back to training. Or that can be something that has gotten worse over time and finally gets to the point that it's going to take you out of training permanently. I say in life that lethal things come either very fast or very slow. Very fast would be you're hit by a bullet or a car hits you or just something comes out of nowhere. You don't have enough time to react and you're killed. Very slow would be cancer, something that is kind of lurking and slowly working on you, and it creeps up on you. And by the time you realize it, it's too late. And it's the same with the kind of injury that can take you out of training permanently. It can be some specific event that happens really bad. You just blow out your knee and now you can't train again, or something again with your spine or your neck. Or it can be something that builds up slow over time. And it's a problem that keeps getting worse and you're not dealing with it. And then it gets to the point where now you really can't train anymore. So let's just agree that injury of any type is the enemy, especially the second and third types that I said, the injuries that take you off the mat at all. So I've got basically 5 rules to avoid injury, and we'll talk about each one of them. Choose the right instructor and school to work in. Choose the right partners to train with on any given day. Have a safe physical environment, whatever the space is that you're training in, whether that's at home or at your school that you train at. Have the right attitude, right? So be the right partner for somebody else, and we'll talk more about that. And bring the best machine you can to the mat. And that's talking about bringing a body that's in good shape and not likely to get injured. So, number 1, choose the right instructor. People usually have a choice of what instructor they have in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's enough schools now that chances are, if you're in any kind of reasonably sized city, there's probably more than one school, and you actually have the opportunity to choose the right instructor. Generally, people, when they don't know any better, will just go to this school that's closest to them. And usually that's absolutely fine. But I just want to point out that that might not be the best school for you. There might be things going on there that don't make it the best fit for you. So you have some choice. And generally, wherever you train, and even if you've been training somewhere for a long time, if something's going on there that's not right for you, that's putting you at risk, it's okay to switch to another school to protect yourself. So the first thing you want to look for in an instructor is where the instructor is setting the right culture for the school, where you're less likely to get injured. And what I mean by that is if there's a high degree of aggression in the school, if the instructor is really driving people hard, maybe they're super focused on competition and they're trying to push people beyond their limits, that is going to create situations where people are more likely to get injured. And it's going to attract people, like a clientele of people who are willing to push it closer, maybe younger fighter guys, people who aren't as concerned about being injured or who can recover from being injured. When we're young, we think we're invincible. So if you're training at a school with super aggressive young people who think they're invincible, there's a higher chance that you and they are going to get injured. Also, just different types of schools, depending upon what's being taught there. So there are what you might think of as an MMA gym that's got a cage in the corner and it's also offering Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You're going to tend in that kind of an environment to have fighters or professional fighters or people who want to become professional fighters. And so you're going to tend to encounter people who are more aggressive and more physically fit and who are putting it on the line because they think it's what they're going to do for a living. And that can be a great place to train. I trained at Fairtex in San Francisco and then what became El Nino Fighting Center, Gil Melendez, and all great training partners of mine. Nobody ever injured me. But it is tough training in a place like that because you tend to have people who are coming through and either think of themselves as wannabe fighters or are actually serious fighters. And that means there's more aggression going on and people are going harder and there is generally a higher chance of being injured. Then you might have on the other end of that spectrum what I would just call a jiu-jitsu school, right? An academy where there might be music going on maybe during the training, but basically there's one class or one class in one room. People are quiet, they're listening to the instructor is teaching, and it's more formal. And that could be with a gi or no gi. There's not necessarily a higher chance of being injured if you're just training in no gi or something like that, or training in a place where maybe there's a looser structure where it's okay to come late or something like that. That can still be very friendly. But generally speaking, places that think of themselves more as schools with classes that start and stop, where people are quiet and listen to the instructor, that tends to be the kind of place where you're less likely to get injured. So if that's your concern, I would look for places that are more like that. A sort of a side note that if your instructor is around your size or smaller, there's a good chance that they're going to be teaching things that if it works for them, it will definitely have the possibility of working for you. But also, just in general, smaller instructors tend to have smaller people around them. If it's a big, massive, super strong instructor guy, they probably have friends who are big, massive, and strong, and it might just attract a bigger, stronger type of guy to the school. And there's nothing wrong with training with big and strong people. You actually want that. It's more about the aggressiveness. But I just mentioned that I have noticed that where the instructor themselves is not super big and strong, they tend to attract a clientele who is not super big and strong and who therefore has to rely more on technique and less on brute force. Now, I mentioned no gi versus gi, and that doesn't necessarily make a difference in injury. When you're wearing a gi, that gives extra chances of fingers getting caught, of toes getting caught. That's a small risk, but that can certainly happen. But what I do notice is often when people are training in no-gi, they might be going with a rule set that includes heel hooks and leg attacks, where sometimes when people are training in gi, it's either not allowed or a subset of that's allowed, like with the IBJJF rules. I think leg attacks, which could mean leg bars and slicers and heel hooks and straight foot locks and toe holds, all these things that can tweak at or twist the knee is what I'm most concerned about. All of those can be practiced safely, but there's no question that increases your chance of injury. And the reason for that is when you're attacking upper body joints, they tend to have more flexibility and you'll start to stretch and someone will start to feel some pain and they'll know that, oh, this isn't going well and they can tap. Frequently, when you're going against the way the knee works, something is being twisted and torqued, and someone might know they're in danger, but they're not feeling any pain. They're not getting that signal. And the only time they get the signal that something is wrong is when suddenly something is torn, a ligament is torn. So it raises the risk that especially an inexperienced person is not going to tap, is going to get injured. Or if the inexperienced person is the one trying to apply the move, that they're going to apply it too hard or not realize that they're as close to injuring the person as they thought. So it's just a fact that if you want to minimize your chance of injury, you should be very careful if you're training with people who are applying leg attacks. You want to be sure that they are very skilled, that we do what's called catch and release. Like, I gotcha, I could have finished you, but I'm going to let you go. And they can even tell you that. So just be advised that that is a factor in increasing the potential for injury. And I see a lot of young people today who are getting their legs tweaked and limping around. And I'm just telling you, they're going to have problems 20 years from now. You know, when they're 30 years in as a black belt, they're going to be seriously orthopedically challenged if they kept tearing ligaments and things like that in their knee. So just be careful of that. Now, whatever format you're working in, whether it's gi or no gi, when you're starting from your feet and doing takedowns, that also increases the chance of injury, which doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing takedowns, but it means you need to be sure, first of all, you have plenty of space around you, so you're not going to crash into somebody else. But also, it increases the chances of someone sweeping out a foot or catching a knee. And that's why you see people who sometimes are coming out of judo because of knee injuries, because judo spends more of their time standing and throwing. In fact, a lot of people move from judo to jiu-jitsu as they get older because they don't want the explosiveness of judo and it's a bit too much on their knees and things like that. And so it's fine to be training takedowns, but I would say in general, for safety, it's safer if you just start where you're both on the ground or where one of you is on the ground. Or if you're starting from standing, nothing stops you from making grips and then sitting down to the ground and bringing it down to the ground. I'm a big fan of takedowns, got no problem with takedowns, but just telling you, the more time you spend competitively practicing takedowns, the higher risk of injury you have, especially against your knee or potentially against your shoulder or your head if you're thrown and you land poorly. Now, my second rule, which is super important, although they're all important, is to choose the right partners. Now, what I mean by that is if you're not at a school and you're just training with friends, then yeah, choose the right partners. Make sure that your friends are people who are not going to injure you. And even when you're at a school, you often get to decide who you're going to train with. And you want to find people, if your goal is to not get injured, who are more chill, right? Who have an energy level that's a little down, or people who are not like super aggressive and working out some, I don't know, childhood trauma or something like that, or they're mad at their boss and they're like going to take it out on people on the mat, right? If you're trying to avoid injury and you're trying to learn, you generally want to avoid those kind of people. So that's where you can choose. If you know somebody is a really rough training and doesn't really have good control, just kind of steer over away from them sometimes and steer over to somebody else. You get to choose generally who you're going to train with. Now, I can tell you this one's really, really hard for me because I see it as a challenge to take people who are really tough. I have said before, my first rule is actual fighting and being able to defend yourself. And so I actually like it when somebody comes into the mat who's seriously strong, seriously big, and maybe a bit crazy. Because to me, that's a little bit more like real life. And they're going to make crazy moves and they're going to respond in ways that are not like a real seasoned jujitsu person. And I like to remind myself that that's how regular people fight. So personally, I don't mind that, but I'm a high level black belt. I can handle it. For you, generally speaking, if you're trying to avoid injury, you don't want to do what I do, which is find the aggressive person and say, hey, you want to train? You want to generally try to steer clear of that person. In fact, ideally, you want to train with someone who's a bit better than you and more skilled and better technique than you, who's not going to just do anything stupid. That's your best chance at avoiding injury. But you can't always get someone who is better than you to want to train with you, especially if you're a white belt and the really good people are purple belts or something. I should also mention that women can particularly have a tough time training with men because some men just don't want to tap to a woman. So if a woman starts to gain an advantage, the man might turn up the volume more than he otherwise would. We as men have a responsibility to be good partners for everyone on the mat, large or small, male or female, and don't become so aggressive that we end up injuring our partner. So just talking to the men now, you should train normally with women and not abuse your strength like you wouldn't abuse it with a smaller guy. And certainly don't go ballistic if a woman is beating you. Just appreciate how hard she's worked to get that good and use that experience to learn where your technique could get better. Also, if you have any tweaks or injuries or just general limitations, always let your partner know about that. So if your elbow has been bothering you, or if you're just coming back off of an injury or something like that, tell everybody you're training with, hey, be careful of my elbow, or hey, please don't attack my elbow, or whatever. You can even put some red tape around your elbow or something like that, that is a visual reminder to everybody you train with, hey, stay away from this area. That's actually good because frequently as we start to train, we get a little adrenalized ourselves and we forget to mention to people that we're nursing some sort of injury. Or we do mention it and we say, hey, listen, be careful of my arm. And you're pointing to your left arm. And then 3 minutes later, in the middle of a giant match where you've been rolling around, the person has forgotten about it, or maybe they don't really remember, was it the left arm, was it the right arm? So you don't see a lot of people doing it, but I think it's a great innovation that if you could put something physical on your body at the place that the injury is, that the person's going to see during the whole match and keep reminding them, stay away from that. That's just a great way of dealing with that. Now, rule number 3 is to have a safe physical environment. And one would hope that if you're going to a school, they have set it up as a safe physical environment, but I just want to define for you what that means, whether it's at a school or whether you're training in your own garage or something like that. So a safe environment means, first of all, obviously sufficient mats on the floor. And if the mats are particularly sticky, that can be a problem because that can catch a foot and then you can then twist a knee and that can cause an injury. If they're too slippery, like you're training and now you've sweat all over the place, that's also a little bit of a risk because you can decide to stand up or shoot in or try to post on a hand and suddenly your base slips right out from under you. That can cause a problem. So there's a happy medium there. Ideally is to have what's called a floating floor where unless the floor you're on is already a wooden floor underneath all the mats, that if it's concrete, as it is in many industrial environments, that they've built a floor up that's a couple inches up that is made of wood and then put the mats on to that. And what that does is it gives it a slight bounciness. And that's certainly good if you're doing throws and like judo, because if you're going to slam into the ground again and again, it helps disperse some of those vibrations. But I'm telling you, as someone who's been doing BJJ now for, I don't know, 35, coming up on 40 years or whatever, you're going to take damage again and again when you're hitting your knees and your elbows on the ground. Remember, I said lethal things, and in this case, lethal meaning taking you out of training, can come either fast or very slow. So being on a hard mat where there isn't a lot of flexibility, when you keep putting your hand on the mat, or you keep putting your elbow, or you keep putting your knee, that is going to wear you down over months and years. And that's the kind of very slow problem that you can avoid if you have a good floating floor, or at least have mats that are sufficiently soft. You can, if you want, also wear knee pads or elbow pads. They can be kind of a pain because they slide around, although you can tape them in place using rock tape, as long as you apply that sufficiently before training so that the tape has time to set. People don't really think about tape is really glue. So if you tape up your skin or something right before you start training and you start sweating, frequently it'll just fall right off. So before you drive to the class, or 30 minutes before, you can tape your knee pad into place, put your pants on over it. That's a way to keep the knee pads in place. And again, you may not need that, but at some point, if you do, that's a good trick to know. Another thing to watch out for is a gap in the mat that can catch a toe. This can especially be an issue if you're training somewhere where the mats aren't permanently installed and tightly pushed together. Mats can slide apart as you train, or if you're using those sectional folding gymnastics mats, they can have little gaps along the seams. So be sure mats are pushed as tightly together as possible before you train, and if a gap is still there, just stay away from it as much as you can. And also, in terms of the padded environment, you want to make sure there's no posts, or sometimes people will put a piece of wood flush up against the mats to hold it in place. But that wood itself, if you go off the mat, that could hurt you. So you just want to be sure that there's no sharp edges that you're likely to run into. And if they're just there in the physical environment and you can't avoid them, I mean, the mats always have to end somewhere at some point, then try to keep your distance from that. And that will pay off over time. In general, with training, you want to keep your fingers together. Like, don't spread your fingers out so they can get caught on things. Learn to keep your fingers together. If you get a tweak in your hand or something like that, tape fingers together using the buddy system, or tape toes together. That will help just avoid these small digit injuries. It used to be, when I started training, that people were doing jiu-jitsu, some of them, with wrestling shoes on. Wrestlers wrestle on a gummy, sticky mat, and they are wearing wrestling shoes to give them traction. They're also wearing ear guards. And it's interesting to me that we saw that in the early days of jiu-jitsu, but you just don't see that on a jiu-jitsu mat almost ever. Certainly not someone wearing wrestling shoes, and not someone wearing ear guards. I would say wrestling shoes in jiu-jitsu you should stay away from, because the stickiness of the wrestling shoes can get caught in a gi, and I think that just increases the chance of a knee injury. But ear guards, if you care about how your ears look and you don't want to get cauliflower ear, if that's a problem for you, wearing ear guards before a problem starts, because once you start to get cauliflower ear, if it hurts, then putting the ear guard on can rub it even more and can hurt. But there's nothing wrong with that if that's something that concerns you. Although I have not met anybody who actually stopped training jiu-jitsu because of getting cauliflower ear, but I can understand why people would not want to have it. Now, a real important thing in terms of your physical environment is managing the space between you and the people around you. This is obvious, but it's surprising to me how many times people don't really do this. One of the ways to get injured is not by something you did or something your partner did to you. It's because someone's foot from the people 3 feet away came over and crashed and hit you in the face and hit you in the head. Especially if you're a person on the bottom and your arms are trapped up and you can't get your hand to defend yourself and to protect your face. So it's very important that while you train, you be conscious of where the other teams are, both so you don't hit them and so they don't hit you, especially if you're the person on top. If you're passing someone's guard, or if you've got them pinned, even while you're trying to finish the person, you need to pay attention around you and protect the person who is now defenseless, where their face is exposed and they can't defend themselves. And move yourself away. Or if some people are coming close to you and maybe they're not as high a belt rank as you, ask them to move away. Generally speaking, if you're passing someone's guard, you're going to drive forward and their head is going to keep sliding away. So if there's people practicing takedowns over there, you don't want to be passing someone's guard with their head facing those people, because you're going to tend to drive towards them, and someone who's practicing takedowns could fly suddenly and come in your direction. So it's always safer to turn, even in the middle of grappling. Just stop, reorient yourself, so there's not something behind them they can't see that's likely going to come and hit them. In fact, in general, training closer to a wall is safer. So as long as you're not smashing up against the wall, which you might want to do if you're practicing MMA, and that's fine. But training close to the wall means that there's that whole side now where nobody can come in your direction and you only have to pay attention to the other direction. The safest place is to be near the corner. So now you've got two walls, and it's much easier to get your field of view, even out of the corner of your eye as you're training, on where other people might be. So that's just, again, a little trick for staying safe is gravitate towards the wall, gravitate towards the corner. You want to be sure that the place you're training, that they're washing the mats, ideally after every training class, or at the very least once a day with some sort of a real disinfectant. You want to be sure that you're washing your uniform, that people you train with are washing their uniforms, and ideally at least wash your hands and face before you leave the school with good soap, even if you're going to wait to take a shower when you get home. If there is a shower at your school, take the shower as quickly as you can. I only say this because there are rare instances, but not as rare as you think, where someone does get a staph infection and it actually becomes a very serious and sometimes even a life-threatening problem. So you just want to nip that in the bud by showering down really well as quickly as you can, or like I say, at the very least, just go into the bathroom at the school before you head home and soap up your face, let it sit for just a couple seconds before you rinse it off. That will really help you avoid these kinds of infections. Now, the fourth rule, and I think this one is super important, is come with the right attitude, okay? This means a few different things. First of all, it means you be the partner that you wish you had. So it doesn't make sense for you to say, I really want someone who's not going aggressive and there's not just going crazy on me. And then how do you train? You're aggressive and you go crazy on other people. That's just not going to work. If you want people to have good control and to not go violent when they're working with you, don't go violent when you're working with them. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I'm surprised at how many people don't do that. Someone will start a match and say, hey, listen, I want to go light. And then they're totally not going light, right? They don't seem to even know what light is. So don't be that person. Remember, be the partner that you want other people to be for you. So go slow, go with control, don't go ballistic, because if you do that, the other person is going to probably match that, and then they're going to go ballistic back on you. They're going to match your energy level, and that's how injuries can occur. In fact, I'd say keep a measure of playfulness in your training, but not carelessness. And I do this all the time. Everybody who trains with me know that I just like to feign gripping, especially when the match is just starting. That's when I'm going to set the tone. In fact, before I start training with someone, even when I have multiple matches on each training match on the mat, I'll say, how's your body today? Just ask someone. And just asking them that is a nice thing, right? And they can say, oh, my elbow's tweaked, or I'm a little tired, or I'm good. They will usually ask you back. And that immediately sets a tone that, hey, you're caring for them. Now they're talking to you, they're caring for you. And it just gets you off on the right foot, literally, for your training to understand, oh, I guess we're taking care of each other. We're asking how each other's bodies are doing. In fact, I ask people how they're doing, and when they say they're absolutely fine, I will say, good, let's keep it that way, or they'll ask me, how you doing? And I'll say, I'm 100% of my 20%. You know what I mean? But having that question come out before training immediately sets the stage that, hey, we're going to take care of each other. And that helps avoid injury. Now, in terms of the playfulness, you don't want to be annoying to someone, and you do want to take training seriously, but experiment. I'll sometimes put my hand somewhere and let someone try to grab it, and I'll move it away. And then I'll put it there again just to tease them and move it away. And then I'll smile, and they're so serious. And then they look at me and they realize, oh, I'm playing a little game with them. And then they'll smile and they'll relax a little bit because they'll know I'm not taking it that seriously. And then they won't take it that seriously. And again, that helps to keep people's energy at a manageable level and helps you avoid injury. Basically, that all falls into the category of, and I've said it many times on this podcast, leave your ego at the door. Of course, you want to get better. Sure, it's good to win, but in your general training, it's not about winning this match, winning this match. If you're winning all the time, then you're not training in the right school, right? You ideally want to be training in a school where you're losing all the time. That means you're now with people who are better than you. That means you're being exposed to techniques. Your weaknesses are being exposed. You can learn these new things, hopefully over time, that keep working on you. But all that requires you to be okay to lose and leave your ego at the door. And if you can do that, that'll cause other people to leave their ego at the door too. And it just makes for a better training session. And I would say tap early, tap often, tap early. There's always this question of, I think the person's got me, but maybe I can get out. And if you're specifically working an escape from an armbar or escape from any particular hold and you want to keep going, great. If you know what you're doing and you're trying to work an escape and you want to work that goal line defense, then do that. But if all you're doing is just trying to hold out, hold out, hold out, and use all your strength to keep the arm bar from being extended or the leg bar from being extended, all you're doing is acknowledging that you're caught, you can't get out, and you're just trying to muscle maybe some extra time to get out. I don't think that that's smart. I think that risks a chance of injury because now you're daring the person to pull even harder and harder. And frequently, as something opens up, it gets weaker and weaker and weaker. So maybe they're pulling super hard, you're pulling super hard, and now it's coming open, whatever the move is, and suddenly it gets weak and it goes too far. So tap early. And don't just tap with your hand on the person, which is the ideal way to tap. Don't tap on the mat. But I always say, okay, I say that very clear and very fast. As I'm tapping, I give an audio cue too. So that way the person has the best possible chance of knowing that we're stopping. I don't want to just say, okay, because maybe there's music playing or maybe they can't hear. I don't want to just tap on the person because in all the tussling of fighting around, they may not realize you're tapping unless it's very, very obvious that you're near finishing. So I just do both. Just say, okay, and tap and do it early. And I'll tell you what, that will keep you on the mat for years longer. Now, my last rule. Bring a good machine to the mat. And this is just a general rule, but this really helps to avoid injury. To be in physically good shape and bring to the mat, to your training, a body that's in better shape. And the way to do that is to put in some extra time off the mat to do the kinds of exercises and things like that that are going to be really helpful and are going to be useful. For me, I go into a gym, I'm working my joints and muscles in as many ranges as I can. So I'm not just going to be doing bench press or something like that, or just doing squats. I'm going to be doing single arm press with dumbbells. I'm going to be going at different angles. I'm going to be using machines that go up, that go out. I talked about this in another episode on strength. The whole reason I'm doing that is to just develop strength and keep mobility in all areas, right? The ability to move into areas that might be injury, but for you are not injury because you're strong and you're flexible there, that can make all the difference in the world. And that is very much a use it or lose it proposition over time. So as you're getting older, things will get stiffer, and especially as you're training or if you're trying to build up bulk and muscle, you're going to get stiffer. And that stiffness means you can't move into areas without it becoming an injury where in the past you used to be. Think of like a kid who's super flexible, right? So you want to maintain that flexibility in your life. We're not just talking about stretches like the splits or something like that, or things that elongate the muscles, which is fine. There's a difference between stretching and actually warming up joints. So before you train, you want to warm up your joints. And that can even begin if you're driving or however you're getting to your class and your training, doing that just while you're driving. When I've got the steering wheel, I'll be pulling back and kind of tugging on my shoulders as I'm sitting in traffic to get my body going because I don't know how much warming up I'm going to get to do even once I get to the mat. When you get on the mat, doing some squats, doing some jiu-jitsu movements, even for 1 minute, just to move through, not just static stretches, but moving the joints, circling the joints, rolling your head. Get your body warm. In yoga, they say you're as young as your spine is flexible. You want to be able to just move. And part of that is taking the time, even if it's just a few minutes, to do a good warm up before you train. And if you don't have time to do that, then you really better pick a good partner and start whatever you're drilling you're doing very light in a very controlled way and let your body warm up that way. Now, also to preserve your joint mobility, you should do a cool down. Just in the few minutes after class, people usually sit around, talk a little bit. If you don't have to run off the mat right away, just take your body and your hips and your knees through some stretches, maybe lean up against a wall, do a passive splits against the wall, work your hips, work your neck, roll back, and just try to get a little bit of movement. So as your body cools down and tightens up, which is always going to happen, you're trying to not get as tight. And I mentioned taking a shower as quickly as possible after training. I would say cold shower, or if you have access to a cold plunge, that's just really good for your joints, especially as you're getting older. And, I've been through the ringer. I know how this goes. That cold water on the joint is really, really helpful. If your fingers are hurting or throbbing after training, soak them in a bowl of ice water. I used to do that at times when I was grabbing too much with the gi. I've learned how to not do that. That kind of warm down and keeping your joints healthy is also very, very important for injury prevention. I would add to that whatever your idea is of the right dietary supplements or the right diet for you. Anti-inflammatory diet is important. Again, whatever that means to you, usually not processed sugars. I happen to eat a fully plant-based diet, have for, I don't know, 40 years or something like that now. That works really, really well for me. Figure out the diet that works well for you, but it wants to be a diet that reduces inflammation and supports your general health, and ideally keeps your energy level up, doesn't leave you like weighed down digesting, so you have the energy to do the stretching and do the exercising. So then when you go to jiu-jitsu, you've got the right body. It's all a 360-degree approach. I would also say have good cardio. One of the reasons people get tired in jiu-jitsu, of course, is they don't have really good cardio, and especially if their techniques are not that good, they need cardio. And as you start to tire, your risk of injury goes up. You may not be able to get yourself out of a problem as quickly, or you might be making more Hail Mary movements that move into something where you're going to have to tap very quickly because you're just getting exhausted. Anything you can do to improve your cardio that you bring to the mat is going to be helpful. For me, that is sprints. I've been doing sprints for a long time. I do them in what's sort of a Tabata style, meaning half as much time resting as I spend running. So if I'm running 20-second sprint, something like that, and I will do it that long sometimes, then it'll be no more than a 10-second rest, then turn around and do the sprints again. Now, sometimes I can't do that because my knees are hurting or whatever from training. So I have to work around that, or I have to do it up a hill, or I have to do it on stairs or something like that. But I'm just a big, big believer in getting out and doing real cardio work. Any kind of cardio work is good, like a spin cycle or whatever is definitely good. I know that can work, but whatever makes you really, really tired. And I notice that when I do that, and then when I come onto the mat, I have much better wind on the mat, I have much better cardio, and then I'm not getting as tired, so I can protect myself more effectively. So that's basically it. Those are my secrets on avoiding injury. Obviously, the best way to avoid injury in jiu-jitsu is just stop training, but we don't want to do that. And that's what any doctor will tell you, and they're not wrong. You have some problem, or your neck is hurting, or your hip is hurting, or whatever it is, and you go into the doctor and you say, "Doctor, I'm training jiu-jitsu and I've got this problem." And if they're a good sports person, the first thing they might say is, "Well, maybe stop doing the thing that is hurting you." And that's certainly logical. But I would say, can you modify the thing that you're doing to be able to keep doing it in a way that it doesn't hurt you anymore? And a lot of that is finding the right partners, having no ego, warming up well, the right school, having a safe training environment. If you can match up all of these things all together and then have a little bit of luck, you should be able to train jiu-jitsu pretty healthfully for many, many decades. So tell me what you think. How have you avoided injury, or where have you failed to avoid injury? You can leave comments wherever you're listening to this. And if you found this episode useful, please do subscribe if you're on YouTube. Please like and share. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, just take that second to write a review. That would be really, really helpful. I appreciate it. I will be back next week with more lessons from the lab. And in the meantime, keep developing your strengths, your wisdom, and go out and do good in the world.